In this session at the Student Hub Live, we take a look at supporting disability, and I'm joined by Lynda Culley. Lynda, you are a disability support advisor in the OU's disability support team, and thank you for coming along today because I wanted to talk to you about why valuing diversity was so important and really about how we do it at the OU. So, we've got this statement, right, which is the OU's statement on equality and diversity, and it is, we anticipate and respond positively to the different needs and circumstances so that everyone can achieve their potential, which is a wonderful statement. So tell us, how do we implement this idea?
Okay, so that is for everybody. It's not just for students with disabilities, but certainly in the team I work in, it epitomises everything that we try and do by anticipating sort of barriers and helping students to overcome those barriers. And we work on a social model of disability. So it's basically the barriers that society puts in place rather than any disability or health difficulty itself. And so we can make adjustments, all sorts of adjustments in our teaching, in our and the way students learn, in all sorts of provision, so that I suppose students are on a level playing field, all students are on a level playing field. And that statement just goes to illustrate part of what we try and do as a university, but you know, I think it particularly epitomises what we do in our team.
It's interesting you say the word, you know, the barriers that society puts, because there are often very obvious ones, such as, you know, ramps on footpaths, for example, you know, crossing the road, for example, can lead to all sorts of complexities if the traffic signals are old-fashioned or in certain places. So there's a lot of obvious things that you can see for physical disabilities. But as you say, these disabilities can either be disabilities or not. It's all about reaching true potential. But what about unseen disabilities? How does the team that you work in support those sides of things in terms of allowing students to achieve their potential?
Well, I suppose the first thing is we need to know about it, really, and that can be a barrier in itself because students are perhaps reluctant to disclose the fact that they might have extreme anxiety, they might have other mental health difficulties, they might have other unseen disabilities, problems such as, I suppose, things like epilepsy maybe, or autism, lots of things that you wouldn't necessarily know go on. And if they're given the opportunity to disclose, which they are at every station. I mean, from the minute they pick up a phone, they go on the website, you know, there's always that possibility to tell us, and then we can start putting support in place and helping them. One of the things is a disability support form that they have access to, where they can start to tell us about some of the difficulties they have and how we can help them overcome them.
Okay. So your team really focused then, as you say, this is about all students, but your team in particular focus on students who want to disclose that something is going to impact on their studies, and you really work with those students to make reasonable adjustments to support them in their learning.
Yes.
And as you say, one of these ways of doing things is a disclosure form. How does that process work, and is it sort of categorical? I mean, some people might have a period of depression that then may lift. So some things can be a little bit fluid.
They can.
Tell us how this process works then, and I guess what the advantages are of engaging with it.
Well, I suppose the first thing that happens when a student decides to, they don't have to fill in the form anyway. I mean, they can just tell us. And if they've told anyone in the university, then they're deemed to have told the university, unless they specifically don't want anyone to know. And even then we have to, you know, just sort of make a confidential note. They would tell us how they think it would impact on their study, but it might just be for a short term, so that happens quite a lot. So we would write a profile. That's essentially what the form's for. Right. Our team spends an awful lot of time writing disability profiles for tutors, really, but anyone else who's involved in that support. So it's a confidential profile. It's sort of owned by the student, so they get the chance to see what we've written. They can change it at any time. So as you say, if somebody has got a short period of ill health, or it's very fluctuating, sometimes it's useful just for the tutor to know that, though, that sometimes they might not be able to access their studies as easily as others. So it gives the opportunity to put something very brief or something really quite extensive, if necessary.
Have you got an example of one of these, or could you talk us through something that might happen?
Yes, I've got. Well, this is just a printed out version of quite a complex profile. But it isn't terribly long, but it probably tells this student's tutors everything that they need to know when they're starting their studies. And it will go with the student all the way through. So every tutor, if they change, they're probably going to change modules every year. They're almost certainly going to have different tutors every year, and it can be updated. So if a tutor finds, that something really helped this particular student, we can pop that in their profile for the next tutor. That's an ideal scenario. It doesn't always happen that way.
So this is very complex, but it's a brief profile. It's something that's seen by the student and really focuses on how the tutor can work with the student to enable them to achieve their full potential.
Yeah, so we'd have a sort of summary at the beginning about what the disclosed disabilities or difficulties are, then how they impact on their study, and then how we can overcome them, adjustments that tutors can make. So we've got, what here we're saying Adam will need as a reasonable adjustment for his disabilities, printed copies of module materials where modules are presented online, and the format that he'd like those into. Then tutors are asked to offer advice in breaking module material down into manageable chunks to aid concentration. Encourage.
That sounds like something I could do with as well. So to what extent, I mean, your teams do a lot of things, and I'd like you to show the poster of the sorts of things that you do, because obviously this profile is one of the important things.
Yes.
It's one of the things that, as you say, really benefits both the student and the tutor, enables students to, achieve their maximum potential. However, it is constructed with careful consideration and consultation, so that these are right for the student. I mean, a lot of people would like to have extra time in exams, for example, but that's not always the most kind thing to do for everybody. So how do your team work with these processes to really make sure that you are doing the right thing to support each individual student?
Well, they are individual. A lot of them, we have sort of, I suppose you'd call them templates, really. So we know that a certain disability might have a certain impact on studies, but of course every student is absolutely individual, and that's why we encourage them to tell us the sort of nuances of their particular condition. As you say, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, we'll often say tutors need to be, quite lenient with perhaps assignment deadlines, but that doesn't necessarily help the student, so we can write that in there, but it's something that needs to be discussed with the tutor. And if somebody had OCD, for it, obsessive compulsive disorder, for example, it might not be the best thing for them to keep putting it off and putting it off. So we do have to work with, with those kinds of things in mind and what's best for them. And so, I mean, every student will probably say, "Oh, I want to have extensions to assignments written into my profile." And so that's why it's suggested that might be a way forward, but it isn't necessarily going to be, and that's where the tutor can come in and discuss it, and they might find that actually there's something else that works better, and then we can update the profile in that way. Things like extra time in exams, that's typically, say, a student with dyslexia, but then we'd work with the exams teams, and they discuss and liaise with students to, they'll need certain types of evidence, for example, a formal assessment, that kind of thing, to have that kind of provision.
So you're liaising with a lot of areas of the university, and most importantly with the students. But you've got a lovely poster I'd love you to show about what your team does, because I think it really sort of encompasses the very broad nature of the aspects that you engage with. Possibly the bottom part of this poster is the most interesting, where you're talking about consistent procedures, disabled students allowance, information advisory guidance, profiles, which we've just been talking about. Can I do it, and assessing needs. So can I do it? I mean, that's a very important part of picking up. We've been speaking to student support teams about assisting students both with guidance around their study intentions, but also perhaps other areas of their life that could impact on their ability to study. So how do you actually How do you support students, I guess, with going through this process in terms of the emotional side? You're a lovely, friendly, engaging team that I can imagine lots of students would want to talk with. But briefly, can you tell us what happens when students interact with you? And as you've mentioned before, this is an optional thing.
Well, they would probably have filled out one of those forms, and then that would invite discussion, really. It's just a starting point. So they'd call us and we'll go through the form with them if we can. I mean, often we can't get hold of a student, so we'd write a disability profile based on what they've told us and sort of typical adjustments that we might make for that kind of disability. We don't, in our team, in the disability support team, get involved in is it the right course for them, for example. We'd refer them to the student support team, and they would get involved in that sort of academic guidance. But we might have a conversation about, you know, are you sure you haven't taken on too much study? You know, given that, you know, you might need extra support and it's going to take you a bit longer than other students, perhaps. We might have those kinds of gentle conversations. We would always encourage students who feel that they'd like to check whether they might be eligible to apply for the Disabled Students Allowance, and we can help them through that process if they get really stuck, because it's quite a form, as all these things are. And a lot of students think that if they've completed the disability support form to tell the university that they've also applied for the Disabled Students Allowance, and that isn't the case. It's a completely separate government-funded support, but we do encourage them to.
About how to get the forms filled in, and you know, support students in getting those through.
Well, the university has to fill in part of it anyway to confirm that they're studying for the funding bodies. So we can do that bit for the student, and so we can talk them through it on the phone. Mostly, I think once they realise it's, you know, they don't have to do it all in one go, and they can get someone to help them and so on. But we are always available to talk students through it if they get really stuck, even though it isn't our form, so to speak.
No, absolutely. Okay, so a really good source of advice and support with the profiling. You spoke also about reasonable adjustments, and you mentioned printed materials for your student Adam, who we were looking at as an exemplar. But you've also bought some comb-bound books, and you assist students again with, you know, aspects that are suitable for their individual needs. But these comb-bound books are one physical example that we could, I guess, bring in to show students. So can you tell us about this way of adjusting for students, and perhaps more broadly the kinds of things that you do in addition to this?
Okay.
Oh, it's upside down.
Is it? Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
It's because the other one's
I know,
upside down.
it's tricked us.
So that's just a standard OU textbook that's had basically the spine taken off and spirally bound. And the reason that students might prefer that format is perhaps if they want to use a magnifier, for example, they can lay it flat for scanning. If they're lying in bed, perhaps it's easier to prop up on a stand or something in bed. Dyslexic students might use it to use their coloured overlays and so on. So a lot of these come from the warehouse, and they're available on some modules, and students have access to find out which modules have the comb-bound versions. Brilliant. And then these are the ones we do ourselves. So this is a module that's entirely online. Right. And a lot of students, it shouldn't be a preference, it should be a need, but there's so many reasons why students, although they can study online, they don't want to exclusively. They might not be able to sit at a screen for very long. They might have migraines that, you know, are triggered by glare, epilepsy. They might, a lot of students with dyslexia, especially before they learn other strategies, will think that they want everything printed, and so we'd be happy to, you know, to do that for them. And so they're not as pretty, and they come spirally bound, or they can come how they want them, but that's the standard. And
as you say, this isn't a preference, it's something that is, after an assessment, deemed appropriate for that particular student.
It's usually after a discussion with somebody like me as to whether that is the best thing for them, actually, because sometimes, I mean, it might not be, and the fact they can change the screen resolution or change the background or the font that they don't know might mean, you know, actually that solves all their problems. It isn't really online.
Yeah. And my next guest is going to talk about the Disabled Students Group and how they support students. And I also know that she's used a variety of ways of finding out the best solutions for her, which, as you say, are not always the most obvious ones that one comes across. So it's really about focusing on the individual, thinking about learning needs, and also being flexible to change, because different strategies can work at different moments.
That's right, and we need to anticipate as well. I mean, the module teams are always anticipating what barriers might be, so we have a variety of formats these days that should suit everybody, but there will be, we still have to make adjustments that we couldn't have anticipated, or perhaps we didn't and we should have. And we do have to sometimes react rather than anticipate, but that's what we try and do. And we'll do everything that's reasonably possible to support every individual student to make sure they have the best learning experience.
Wonderful. Well, Lynda Culley, thank you so much for filling us in on what the disability support team do at the Open University. I hope you found that useful, and do connect with them and fill that form out if you think that this is something that's appropriate for you. We're going to come back into the next session with some of your comments that have been happening in the chat. But before we do that, we're going to show you a short video, which is something all students need to know about the online library. And then I will be back with Cherry Day to talk about the Students' Association and a student perspective. See you in a minute.